You can fire away with the beginning. Get us going.
Trump. What are your views on Trump?
Well, funny enough, as you know, I'm a Marxist, and as a Marxist, it's always been the question about what social class would overthrow the existing order of society. And from that point of view, it's always the argument is the working classes will become the decisive political force in society. That was the argument Marx made right back in 1848. And if you look around the world today, even where there's supposedly far-right forces in play, from Germany, the AfD, to Le Pen in France, to Donald Trump in America, to Nigel Farage in England, Meloni in Italy. There's a new guy in Romania at the moment. And if you look at all those instances, they're all appealing to the working classes. And on the other side, you've got, some robots from the past, like Keir Starmer, who also says, I represent ordinary working people. My aim is to look after the ordinary working people, the working man and woman. And so they're all appealing to this same layer of society. So for that reason, I would say Donald Trump, even though he's a billionaire and has encircled himself in a gang of billionaires, his political appeal is an appeal to the working classes. And of course, it's limited because he won't be able to sustain that coalition of support that got him elected, precisely because he won't be able to achieve the objectives he claims to be achieving. He says he's out to improve the lot of the masses, and yet the policies he's introduced have already led to a fall in the living standards of the masses. He imagines that American capitalism will reinvest inside the American economy if there are sufficient barriers to world trade to limit the marketplaces for foreign companies to sell goods to the American population. But I doubt that's very much the case, because capitalists don't invest because of some national feeling or because they invest for profit. And if they're not making sufficient profit, they will not invest. And there's nothing to indicate that any of the policies that Donald Trump is introducing will increase the profitability rate for American capitalism. And therefore, there's nothing to indicate that the economy will grow, and therefore that Donald Trump's aura of support will grow. Now, he's attempted to use immigration, as all of them do now, use immigration as a mechanism to try and galvanize support. He also attempted to use the claim that he is a defender of peace in the world, and that the war in Russia, Ukraine better said, and the war in Gaza will be brought to an end. He managed to talk to the Israelis to make a ceasefire for about 2 days, and thereafter the Israelis ignored it. And by the way, he's been surrounded by Israeli stooges. Even Kennedy, who supposedly is opposed to Big Pharma, and took some quite good positions on the issue of the COVID vaccination and stuff like that. As soon as he goes on stage and someone asks him about Palestine, the only answer he's got is Israel has the right to defend itself. And that, by the way, is a bipartisan position in the United States of America, that all the political apparatus is captured by Israel and the Zionists. And therefore the idea that you can have some president who can represent the people when the primary aim of their political objectives internationally is to back Israel tells you everything about their leeway to actually act on behalf of the people. And in relation to Russia, well, why should the Russians listen to Donald Trump? It's quite obvious that the Americans have been financing and arming Zelensky all along. At least Trump turned round to Zelensky and said, game's up, we don't want to finance this anymore, and you basically benefit out of all of this. You and your corrupt entourage have been stealing the wealth, and I'm not going to finance you anymore. In that particular instance, I had some sympathy with Donald Trump's behaviour. But otherwise, I don't think he's managed to achieve anything. He's managed to scare a lot of immigrants. Okay, great. You're opposed to immigrants. At the same time, listening to Elon Musk, he introduced a policy, I think it was last week, whereby white South Africans can go to America and claim to be victims of persecution. I mean, you can't make the nonsense up. You know, white South Africans are victims of political persecution. This is the sort of nonsense they want to promote. So it shows that actually the so-called immigration policy that he's been introducing is purely based on race. It's got nothing to do with an objective campaign to protect the American worker. Don't forget, many American workers are Hispanic or black and so on. Don't forget, they imported into America the black population to work as slaves. They imported the Irish to work as slaves in the Caribbean. They imported the Irish as cheap labour. They imported Germans and people from the Netherlands, in particular, to work in the United States of America. Large numbers of Italians. You know, the United States was known as the centre for immigration, and immigration was the force which drove forward economic progress in the United States. By the way, immigration has been an important component of economic growth all over Europe, and will continue to be so over the next 5-10 years, because as the labour force gets older, the indigenous labour force, mostly white labour force, so somebody is going to have to do the work. The fact is that there's two factors responsible for this. Just one sec. One is the rate of birth in Western Europe by the white population has fallen quite dramatically. That was in advance of 2019. And I saw the latest evidence from the Czech Republic, and it appears that there's something like a 30% fall in the birth rate, which appears to be directly correlated to the COVID jabs. Those who are unvaccinated are 30% more likely to have children than those who are vaccinated in the same age cohort. So in other words, some people were going on about this being some kind of population culling mechanism. Personally, I don't think that's true, but I understand why they think that, given that the evidence from the Czech Republic of a nationwide survey of fertility amongst those who were vaccinated between the ages of 18 years and 39 years of age, those who are most likely to have children, a 30% decline in the birth rate only amongst the vaccinated. So that tells you something horrific has been taking place, imposed on the population. And one of the reasons why I think people have fallen for the sort of passivity in relation to the war in Gaza, the passivity that you see. Yes, there were hundreds of thousands demonstrating yesterday, but then the demonstration's over, and what happens? Where is the generalised rebellion in society about the role of Britain, the role of America, the role of Europe in financing and arming a Holocaust and a genocide against the Gazan people? And by the way, that's a proxy for a Holocaust against the people of the Middle East as a whole, the Arab people of the Middle East as a whole. Not only them, but the reality is, once we accept that the type of behaviour we've seen in Gaza, carried out by the Israeli state and the Zionist gangsters who rule over that state, backed by Europe, backed by America, backed by Britain, once you realise that that's been what's happening to them, then it begins to fit together why it is that the coronavirus vaccinations, as shown by the study from the Czech Republic, 30% decline in the fertility rate. Well, if that's the case, then you can see the barbarism of the ruling elites. And one sec. The barbarism of the ruling elites is also carried out against us here. The point is, what they've done in Gaza is what they'll do to you tomorrow. That's the point. You think they're not preparing for urban warfare, for civil war in America and in Europe? It's exactly what they're preparing for. And when Suella Braverman and Priti Patel started out with their hate marches. There was nothing going on. These demonstrations that they called hate marches were perfectly peaceful civil demonstrations. And now they started, as in Gaza. In Gaza, there has been the highest rate of mortality amongst journalists in the history of warfare. In the history of warfare. But it's not just that. Many journalists from Britain have been arrested under terrorism laws for putting forward their point of view. There's a guy called Richard Medhurst, long-standing Christian journalist. They accused him of being a member of Hamas and detained him under terrorism laws. Under terrorism laws, not only in Britain, but also in Switzerland and in Austria. In other words, there's an international conspiracy by the Zionist lobby in conjunction with the police, in conjunction with the intelligence agencies, in conjunction with the governments of Europe, to repress any disagreement about Palestine. Any disagreement must be repressed. And the way to repress it is to repress the journalist, to scare one, as Napoleon Bonaparte used to say, pour encourager les autres, to encourage the others to behave properly, to act in fear. And that's the idea, That's what they did with the COVID story as well. Don't join the demonstration. Don't join the protest. Don't campaign for your rights, because you'll die if you do. And everyone's gonna die if you do. That was what they told you. So that you avoided demonstrating, you avoided protesting, and you cowered at home behind a mask and stood 2 meters apart when they told you to outside the supermarket. There are still signs on the floor in London, all around the city. Even some shops have still got signs. Stand 2 meters apart. Queue up here, queue up there. What do you think? You can't do that to a sheep. You can't do that to a dog. You can't do that to a rat. You can't do that you can't train any animal to behave in that way. And yet they managed to do that with the Brits. And now when they drop bombs on Gaza, people are, well, at least we don't have, they don't say it, but at least we don't have COVID anymore. You know what I mean? At least we don't have COVID anymore. At least we can go out to a party, go down to, it might be much more expensive, but at least the bombs are in Ukraine, or the bombs are in Gaza. So it's not really us anymore, is it? We're not facing that type of stuff. The point is, the people who are conducting this barbarism are the people who rule over Britain, France, Germany, America, and England. You can go, that my friend is at the encampment outside the American embassy. Well, there are demonstrations once a month at least, national demonstrations they call them. Where do you go from? Yesterday some people were on the demonstration here. You go from where is it? Embankment to Embankment. Embankment past Parliament back to Embankment, or something of that nature. In other words, from nowhere to nowhere for nothing. And then you go and listen. Well, it's a long walk, but who do you pass? Who do you talk to? Who do you speak to? Who do you win over? Nobody. Why is that? Because the reality is that historically, people tend to live in the past. They carry the weight of the past on their shoulder. So people have a trajectory. Normally, I behave this way, so I'll continue to behave this way. I contacted some of the people from Stop the War. I said, why are you marching in a circle, passing nobody, getting no interest by anybody? Why are you doing that? I said, you've done this now for 2 years. Why are you doing it? Why are you going in a circle? He said, oh, what are you talking about? One of them wrote to me, he said, I decided the route of the demo. I said, well, that's the problem. I said, that's the problem. You got 300,000 people who are going on a demo, and you decide it. And who elected you to decide? Who decided? It was decided in 2001. I remember when it was decided what group would lead the anti-war movement in Britain. I know, because I was a contender. I went down to Trafalgar Square on the day the bombing of Afghanistan started. And I had enough money at that time to buy a reasonable amplifier. So when the crowd gathered at Trafalgar Square, I said, okay, We're speaker's corner against the war. Who wants to get up and speak? And lots of people got up and spoke. And so the Stop the War people, the people who wanted to set up Stop the War, they saw this and they had a little gang of their own members of what was then the Socialist Workers' Party. Then they turned around as one of them, I won't name him, but anyway, he's quite well known. He's one of their leaders. Okay, Chris Nyman. He turned around and he got it. Didn't take much, did it? He pulled out his megaphone and he goes, "Come and join us! March to Downing Street!" And so they marched them down to Downing Street in order to chant at each other. You do not overthrow.
There is no such country as Palestine, and you know it. Palestine's already
Come
been
forward,
created,
my
it's called
friend.
Israel.
You are welcome to come and discuss. Are you a war criminal, my friend?
No.
No. Okay. You from Israel?
Hamas are war
Are you
criminals.
from Israel?
Hamas are war
Are you
criminals.
from Israel?
He's from India.
No.
He's from India, yeah.
Unfortunately,
Hamas are war criminals. They went over and murdered innocent women and children.
how many people were supposed to have been murdered?
Nearly 2,000.
No, 1,000. I mean, come on. Has anybody ever heard nearly 2,000?
You're probably denying the Holocaust as well.
According to the news, you can check every day because they always repeat that number. 1,200 people were killed. How many of them were killed by Israel?
None.
None were killed by Israel.
Don't be
None
crazy.
were killed by Israel. It's reckoned that about 300 out of the 1,200 were killed by Israel. How many babies were put in ovens? None. Although the news story said babies were put in ovens and killed. How many women were raped by Hamas? How many women were raped?
So you think you're telling me
How
those
many women
videos?
were raped?
You're telling me those videos are fake, are you?
What videos?
You're a
What
revisionist.
videos?
You're a revisionist historian.
What video?
You are a revisionist
Hang on,
historian.
hang on.
You're
This
talking
gentleman here.
about a country that doesn't exist. You're talking about a region. There is no such thing. Find me a single historical reference before 1960 to a Palestinian people. You will find that there are Arab leaders at the time saying there is no such thing as a Palestinian people.
I'm sorry, but
the land
last
was
week-
allocated to Israel by the League of Nations and then basically validated by the creation of the State of Israel in 1948.
The gentleman here
which
wanted-
you are calling for the destruction of.
The gentleman here wanted to say 1,200 people. He couldn't come to the right
Answer
number.
the question
He
on
couldn't
the
get the right
Palestinian
number.
people.
But
Answer the question.
1,200.
Answer the question on the fictitious
Are
Palestinian.
you Piers Morgan reincarnated?
Yeah.
I didn't realise. Sorry. What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I didn't. All these references.
But you
I
won't
don't
answer
know.
my question.
I
There is
didn't-
no
I didn't-
such
I
thing
didn't-
as
I
a
didn't-
Palestinian
I didn't
people
know I
or
had to
state.
answer every question all at once. You
Well,
were
there's two
talking about
questions.
historical revisionism. Now
You
you
seem to want
mentioned,
to engage
you
in.
said, I'm not taking any notice of October the 7th. But what notice are you taking of the daily bombardment since October the 7th by the Israelis against women and
No,
children?
they're not.
What
Hamas
notice
are
have you
hiding behind
taken?
them. Hamas are hiding behind them.
You know,
So they are
it's like talking to
deliberately
this- it's like
targeting
talking
their
to
own
this-
children.
It's like talking to this moron,
No, I'm not.
Douglas Murray. It's like talking to him.
Well, if I take a gun and hide behind you, like Hamas hide behind their women and children, they're going to get killed. It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science.
You read your
How many are
BBC.
how
Read
many
your
are gonna get
BBC.
killed?
The IDF have given warnings to buildings saying they're going to destroy it because Hamas they know are operating
And how many
there.
buildings
and they have
remain?
basically
How many
given
buildings remain now, having given those warnings?
Probably not
to-
many
to
because
the-
Hamas
to the
are
Hamas?
operating everywhere.
How many Hamas members are there, for God's sake?
The IDF are now
if you've got
liberating
to
Gaza.
kill
The IDF are
50,000 people,
liberating Gaza.
if you've got to kill 50,000 people in order to eradicate Hamas, how many Hamas members are there?
'Cause
I mean,
Hamas
whenever
won't come
someone's
out and
released,
fight, that's why.
Hamas won't come out and fight. The
No,
Israelis,
they hide in tunnels.
The Israelis, you
They
know what
hide
they
in
do? When they go
tunnels.
to war, the Israelis, they hide behind armoured vehicles. They wear nappies so they shit in their pants. So that
No,
when
they
they go
don't.
and fight, they're protected against being killed.
Well,
because the
bulletproof vests are a
Israelis,
good idea in
the
war, mate.
Israelis
Bulletproof
cannot
vests are a good idea
fight,
in war.
as you say, man to man. Rather, they go around slaughtering women and children
Yeah, and Hamas,
on a daily basis.
Hamas
on a daily
hide
basis.
in schools and hospitals. Hamas hide
How many
AK-47s
schools
in
are there?
hospitals.
How many hospitals are left
Well,
in
not
Gaza.
surprising if they're
How many
conducting
are left?
military occupation
So how
and
are
military
they?
activity
So how are
there.
they using the hospital?
You're talking
Women
rubbish.
that the hospitals have been blown up. The schools have been blown up. The women have been killed. The children have been killed. Does it matter to him? No, because he's been indoctrinated. He's been indoctrinated to repeat bullshit after bullshit after bullshit. And you might remember during the COVID story, people were also talking bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. And eventually they came to believe their own story. Now we've got bullshit about war by the Hamas against Israel. In fact, all that happened on October the 7th, with some excess, I'm not denying, but all that happened.
He had to go, man. He had to run. He had to run.
All that happened.
Listen here, I can show you a picture of my granddad. He fought Second World War to liberate the Israelis. British people, African people fought that war to liberate the fucking Jews from the concentration camp. Now they died for nothing. They died for nothing because they're the one committing genocide now.
And they killed the British troops.
You understand? They're the biggest terrorists in the world.
They are the terrorists.
They're the biggest terrorists in the world.
One point here.
You understand?
Nobody fought the Second World War to liberate the Jews. Nobody. The idea the Brits were fighting to liberate is a lie. The idea the Americans were fighting to liberate the Jews is also a lie. And by the way, they talk about how many millions of Jews died in the Second World War. How many Soviets died? How many Roma died? So some 20-something million Soviets died. And then they wonder why the Soviets feel threatened by the incursions of NATO up until their border. They wonder why the Russians are fighting. They're fighting because they remember their parents and grandparents died in the Second World War, and it is contrary to the lies you were told last weekend. The war was not fought between Britain and Germany. It was not fought between America and Germany. The war was fought between Russia and Germany. That's where 70% of the German army fought against Russia. And the Russians defeated the Germans in the Second World War. Everything else is bullshit. The British, the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain compared with Kursk, compared with Stalingrad, where people fought inch for inch, dying in thousands in the freezing cold. That was warfare, by the mass against the mass. And the Germans were smashed. And when the Germans were smashed, that's when the Americans, that's when the British suddenly march into Europe and say, we liberated, we freed. And what happened after the Second World War? After the Second World War, many of the leading Nazis in Germany were given passports to go to South America or go to the United States and work for the CIA and work for the American intelligence agencies. And the British, by the way, don't forget the King of England, before the Second World War, was a supporter of Adolf Hitler. A supporter of there's pictures of Queen Elizabeth doing Nazi salutes when she was a child, trained by her father, was it, or uncle. So, and the British, by the way, at that time, when the Nazis were killing Jews in Auschwitz, the British killed, at the same time, the British killed 3 million people in West Bengal, starved them to death. Now, when did that guy turn around about Hamas? Hamas, on October the 7th, broke out of their concentration camp. As surely as in the Warsaw Ghetto, the people, or the Jewish people in the Warsaw Ghetto, rose up against the Nazis. There is no fundamental difference between what happened then. Yes, there is some excess. In any war, there is some excess, but not like what you're seeing. The disproportionate relationship between Hamas killings and the killings by the Israeli state, and supported, sadly, supported by the overwhelming majority of those who live in Israel. But don't forget, those who live in Israel today, huge numbers of them are recent immigrants. So it's farcical that Donald Trump and his entourage, that Nigel Farage and his entourage are all gung-ho cheerleaders for Israel at the same time as they scream and shout, immigration, 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 immigration. What the hell is Israel? Apart from a nation that constantly brings about immigration by Americans, by Russians, by East Europeans, all invited into Israel, given privileged positions in an apartheid state to murder and kill the Palestinian people. That's the reality of what's going on. And if there was equal rights between the Palestinians and the Israelis, even now, and the Palestinians returned home, they would be in the majority. And the Israelis would have to live with them in peace if they want to live with them in peace. Otherwise, they can do what Nigel Farage and Donald Trump would like to say. They can bugger off back to where they came from, because most of them who came in those circumstances have got two passports. Israeli and American, Israeli and Russian, Israeli and Czech, Israeli and British, Israeli and any of the European countries. And so how can anybody who is honest, who's got any morality, who's got a brain in their head, who bothers to study anything in history, how can anybody cheer these people on? Like this idiot. People thought these people were clever. Jordan Peterson. What a jerk. What a jerk. Every time he's like, go get them, go kill them. Hamas is doing this, Hamas is doing that. All that shit that guy earlier on said. Hamas is hiding behind a baby, so we must blow up the baby. That's what they're saying. Well, they've got 10 babies surrounding every Hamas fighter. If that's the case, how comes is it whenever Hamas release people, hostages they captured, they got a fist bump with a person who even some of the soldiers give the Hamas fighters a hug. Clearly they've been doing something right.
They look more healthy than the Palestinians.
And they look more healthy. Than they've made sure. That guy Ethan last week, the American guy, looks fit as a fiddle. Fit as a fiddle. I'm sure he's been through trauma. Who else? How can you not be through trauma when bombs are landing around you every few minutes and when people, men, women and children are being slaughtered by the Israelis? By the way, one of the reasons I complain about Stop the War Coalition, you look, if you wanted to target the main loci of power supporting Israel, well, it's in Soho Square. There's a building there run by Palantir. Palantir is the #1 technological company organising and orchestrating the slaughter of the Palestinian people. And yet there's only been 1 or 2 protests there. Google, luckily, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a story in the news that the Google workers, these are high paid, £300,000-400,000 people they're paid to do their technological work on artificial intelligence. And they were asked to join a trade union when Google decided to use its artificial intelligence to support the Israeli army in carrying out the slaughters. This jerk in the Prime Minister of England, Keir Starmer, he moans and groans about the conflict in the world, and yet he is directly, the British Air Force give logistical support to the Israelis when they carry out slaughter against the Palestinian people. So you should reject. I'm not saying there are no problems with immigration. The problems with immigration generally stem from the global economic system. That global economic system means people live in penury in huge swathes of the world, and therefore they're desperate to escape. Last year I went to the Canary Islands. You go to the Canary, it's 250 miles from Africa to the Canary Islands. Rough seas regularly, yet people jump on the boat because they have no hope for their lives where they live. You think people who've made it across the Sahara Desert to Libya, to jump on a boat, to go to Europe, you think those people aren't hard, aren't tough, and don't give a shit if they drown? They don't care if they drown. That's the point. So if you've got a world where people don't care if they drown, of course you're going to have mass migration when poverty strikes huge swathes of the world. And where 8 people, this was a few years back, it's less now, 8 people own more wealth than half of the world's population. 150 companies control 50% of the wealth in the world. And then they tell me, oh yeah, you've got to worry about your neighbour who's a migrant. You've got to worry about people coming on a boat. Meanwhile, they go and slaughter them and bomb them and destroy them economically, militarily, diplomatically. They destroy these countries. And then they turn around and say, oh yeah, but the neighbour. Look, the Muslims are coming, going to steal your jobs, rape your children. That's the story they want to tell you. To manipulate your mind, to focus on things that are not the cause of the problems. That doesn't mean there aren't criminal gangs. Are there criminal gangs amongst Albanians? Yes. Are there criminal gangs in the leadership of the elite corporations in Britain? Yes, they are the organisers of the criminal gangs.
Rothschild, they're criminal.
Well, it's more than Rothschild. You see, the mistake many people made. Oh, it's Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab's gone now. Is there anyone else? Yes, there's a myriad of these heads, you know. It's like a multi-headed hydra. You know, you chop off one, another comes. Chop off one, another comes. But of course, it is still important to chop off some. And the one we need to chop off, although it's a massive, gigantic global battle, the one we need to chop off is chop the head of Israel off. We need to destroy Israel, eradicate Israel, because Israel has decided that it must destroy the others in order to survive. That means Israel itself must be destroyed. That doesn't mean the Jews must leave. The Jews must live in peace and harmony with the Palestinian people, to whom they should return their lands. Thanks very much.
Heiko Khoo, everybody!
Come on, Mr. Corbyn. Up there and speak.
Okay.